Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this session. It's a nightcap session with Kava, or as the official term is, conversations over Kava. So those who don't know much about it, Kava is a specialty tea, and you can, I guess, spike it a bit. So the topic under discussion is in this session is Karachi to Kandahar. Is the arc of terror aflame again? And if it is, then it's an internal security challenge for India and also for our neighbors, Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, um, and larger sphere, it will go on to Russia and China, the Middle East, and of course the world, because the footprint of terror groups operating in the AFPAC region, they extend way beyond its geographical boundaries, as we saw with 9/11. If I may begin with you, Jeffrey, the security dilemmas are not region specific, as I said, after 9/11. It's proved that no country is immune, no geographical boundary is sacrosanct. So, given that factor, why is the world still fighting terrorism in an ad hoc manner?
Very good question. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the arc of terror certainly extends beyond Kandahar and Karachi. It extends to the United Kingdom, it extends to Western Europe, and of course many other countries as well. The nature of terrorism has changed a lot over the last 25 years. We've seen, the first period, AQ and all of that. Then it got into the sort of franchises of those terrorist groups. Now it's become more individualized with people being inspired by particular groups. So the nature of the terrorist threat has changed a lot, but it certainly hasn't gone away. If we look at what's happening in the terrorist front in countries like mine, well, of course, we still have the IRA. They're still around. They keep morphing into new guises. Fairly minor threat, but they're still there. There are certain right-wing groups which indulge from time to time in terrorism. But overwhelmingly, the terrorist threat is Islamist in nature. And I choose my words carefully because this in itself becomes controversial, because as soon as you have the prefix almost Islam there, then everyone says, oh, you are now being Islamophobic and this. No, we must make this distinction. We must be able to talk about these things in the right way. These are people who say they are inspired by Islam, but of course, the vast majority of very decent Muslim believers reject that Islamism. And in my own country, for example, where we have a significant minority, people of the Muslim faith, most of them make a great contribution to our society and are well integrated. But it's the minority that we're talking about here, and they continue to be a problem. So India suffers largely from state-sponsored terrorism. Countries like mine, it's mainly internal. We're breeding it ourselves, or we're importing it ourselves. We now have the sort of post-IS generation in our midst and having to deal with that. We also have the problem of returning jihadists. Well, in our case, of course, we've rejected that idea. Other countries have decided they will take back their IS terrorists. So the jury's open on which is the right idea. But so far, because we feel that if you take back someone who's clearly gone to support IS, a brutal terrorist organization, most atrocious organization, and you just then allow them back into your country as if nothing's happened, that's an example to others. And at the moment, we face a problem from young people still being attracted to Syria, to jihadist groups. It's still going on, and in fact, it's a growing threat. And because our attention has all been focused at the moment on the conflict, the war in Ukraine, the invasion by Russia of the Ukraine, our eye, I won't say it's off the ball, but it is not so focused as it has been. May I just make a concluding point? The left in our political scene has tried for a long time to try and shift the focus of anti-terrorism onto so-called right-wing groups. They are a tiny fraction of the problem. We must keep our eye on the main ball, which is Islamist terrorism.
Thank you. Mehbooba, I'll come to you. You're a journalist from Afghanistan. What we are hearing now is that the TTP wants to liberate Khyber Pakhtunkhwa from Pakistan. What is the status of the terror groups there now? Because what we're hearing also is that the ISKP and the Taliban are in conflict with each other. They're in a war-like situation. So these Hydra-headed terror groups, where are we in that situation now?
First of all, I'm not only a journalist, but I'm a human rights, and I'm an activist, really, and a human rights defender. So one of the reasons why I'm in Afghanistan is because of that. The way I see the whole situation in Afghanistan is, in my mind, is extremely clear, because with the Taliban on the other side of the border, Taliban on the other side of the border, and having different names here and different names there. They're all the creation of Pakistan. Pakistan created all of this. Pakistan gave room to them. Pakistan supported them. Pakistan did all of that. And today, because of that went on for years. I mean, of course, with the help of other countries, which are, of course, it was Saudi Arabia, it was the United States, and they were all involved, at that time, when the Russians were involved in Afghanistan, because that's how the game, or that's how the politics of the world demanded it at the time. So now the whole game has changed in a way that finally the real face of Pakistan is showing to the world. And everybody knows that Pakistan really is housing, has been supporting the Taliban all of these years. We all knew it. The world decided not to know it. So they can play this game of, that I don't hear, I don't want to know, that's what they did. But right now, reality is there. The Taliban are in Afghanistan. The Taliban really, and the most interesting thing is that the whole time when the leaders of the Taliban were with the Pakistani government, the Pakistan government were not good with them at all. They put them in prison, a whole lot of them, like their heads, they were in Pakistan prisons, and they were really treated very badly. So now these people are in power. They are in Afghanistan. De facto government or not does not make any difference, because they are there. Now that they are there, they are having their problems with Pakistan, and they're showing it. And they're making sure that the Pakistan knows about it. And they're not afraid of it anymore. And Pakistan right now most probably has to change their whole policy of, one way or another, because they have to live with these people. Because Pakistan right now, as far as the economy is concerned, is really in a bad shape, and they have to get that right. Taliban are also not in a very solid ground at this point. Neither is Afghanistan. So the situation is really pretty awful in that part of the world, especially what they are doing to the women of Afghanistan with regarding the education is concerned, the work of the women are concerned, and the economy. And if we continue doing what they are doing, to the people of Afghanistan, our economy is going to collapse like the same way Pakistan did in a matter of few days. So this is where we are. It's a part of the world that is kind of a deep into conflict. But what really absolutely in this whole time amazes me is the fact that I was always hoping, for some reason, I don't know, because of the India and Indian people and Indian government being such a supporter of Afghanistan and the Afghan people all of those years. How come at this time, we haven't heard anything from India whatsoever? I call this the Mr. Moody's India, and from Mr. Moody's India, we haven't heard anything. And this is, to me, is extremely surprising, because of the one thing is the U.S. left the way they left Afghanistan, the void that they have created in that part of the world by doing what they did. They were supposed to leave, I'm not saying, but the way they left was really, pretty awful. So that left that void. And then India looks at the whole situation the way it is, with China sitting where it is. And especially at this conference, I wanted to mention this because apparently over here in this um, this particular gathering is based on something that is really supposed to be, we should look at the world for what it really is.
Okay.
So that's why it's very important to me, and I want to know, but I don't have any answers for that at all.
Right. Sushant, I'm coming to you. You've seen this region. You've written on this, and what Mehbooba said about Pakistan and Afghanistan, it resonates here. But coming to the question of terrorism, let's go back to the main thing. I mean, of course, we can talk about human rights violations and about the feeling of abandonment that many Afghans might have vis-a-vis India. But if I was to come back on terror, the country reports on terrorism, the UN report, it says that it emphasizes that Islamabad has been using its soil to harbor UN designated terrorists. This is something that India's been talking about all the time. You've been going on television channels, writing your reports. Everybody knew about it, but nothing was done. Do you think even now there's a fatigue? Even at the dialogues here, everybody's talking about Ukraine and China, and nothing has come up about AFPAK.
I think the world has forgotten AFPAC. It's quite simple. They've they've packed their bags and left, and they think that this is not their problem anymore. It will be when, God forbid, another 9/11 or another 7/7 or one of these attacks happens, which will happen. Uh, you know, the question which is to be asked, I can understand certain strategic compulsions. I can even understand fatigue of war, 20 years you're fighting. Although I think that's also questionable whether you fought the war which you should have fought. And nothing that I'm saying is not known to people in the West, right? These guys were there. They were fighting this war. They had the intelligence. They knew who were the bad guys. And still they gave them a pass. And you have to ask them why they did that. What is today happening to Pakistan on their economy? Did the US not have the similar levers to turn the screws on the Pakistanis, who everybody knew was giving refuge to the Taliban at that point of time? Could they not have turned the screws on them to force compliance on them, to force compellence on them? And somebody should ask why they never did that. Somebody should ask the legion of journalists, people who write about how India is a fascist country, how India's democracy is in danger in India. These same characters would write about, Taliban 2.0, a changed Taliban, a new Taliban, a Taliban which wants to move in step with the rest of the world. Where is the accountability of all those people who are feeding that, pardon my French, bullshit to us? We guys never bought it. We knew what the Taliban are, right? We were under no illusions. But what about all those think tankers and those journalists who were writing that, this is a completely different, this will be a very benign Taliban? Look, I
2 weeks. It lasted 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks.
No, it didn't even last that, because even in the places where they had taken control before they captured Kabul, everybody who was looking at Afghanistan knew what they were doing in those areas which, quote unquote, were liberated. Now, you know my family, right? I have nothing against women education and anything, but look at
Against women's education.
no, because what I'm going to say, it might cancel me tomorrow, but I must say it. Look, it is certainly not my case that educating women, giving women equal position in society is not important. I think it's extremely important. I'm all for it. But is that the only metric on the basis of which the rest of the world is going to judge the Taliban regime? Is everything else with the Taliban after that kosher? Do we understand what forces of darkness they represent? You said that, the TTP is looking at just the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. No. I think
They want to come till Lahore.
They want to capture. Look, this is an expansionist ideology. At the end of the day, what people need to understand is that this is a millenarian ideology. You can kill 1,000, you can kill 20,000, you can kill 100,000. It does not end there. There will be more people. It's from that Hindu mythology of Rakt Bij. The more you kill, the more will rise. And until and unless you are going to address that ideological fount out of which these guys are coming, which nobody has bothered to do, because as Jeffrey says, political correctness came in the way.
Okay.
Right? So unless you're going to do that, this will come back to haunt us. I think Karachi and Kandahar are only the epicenter. And Afghanistan is once again likely to become terror central number one, because unlike what we were told, the Al-Qaeda is flourishing out there and all kinds of other despicable elements are flourishing out there. And nobody has stopped that.
Right.
So this is only going to grow from there. And let's see who wants to go into Afghanistan the next time.
Right. Shlomit, I'm going to come to you. Everybody says follow the money, right? And you are an expert on terror financing and Hawala operations and all that. So I want to ask you that, when NATO withdrawal happened, the prime funder of terror in Afghanistan and the jihadi groups, they kept operating and there was narcotics trade too. How to stop this? How to stop this spillover? Because as Sushant said, it's going to spill over into India. It's going to spill over all across this region. So how do we stop this? What do we do?
Thank you so much for the question. So indeed, you mentioned correctly that terror is an international problem. Countries tend to think that it won't happen to them, and they don't perhaps many times fight against it early enough. And especially the aspect of financing of terrorism, because money runs the world and money runs terrorism. Terrorism cannot happen without funding. And in order to follow the money, you really need to work on that and want to do that, and not to put a blind eye on that and ignore that. Now we see that many countries around the world are not aware enough of these risks and those problems. The FATF, the Financial Action Task Force evaluation, just recently demonstrated that about 30% of the countries are not efficient in following the money, and in particular with respect to terrorism financing. Now, I think that recently we've seen that with the sanctions that were imposed on Russia. Countries thought that immediately, we'll be able to trace the fund and find everything immediately. And then I think that the Western world also realized how complicated is that, and that the mechanism that they were hoping that are in place were not. So given the approach that this combat is an international combat, and countries need to do a couple of things. First, they need to develop internal infrastructure in order to follow the money. It requires a lot of expertise. You need to invest in people that know how to read financial statements and know how to find the dirty money. You need to have IT system, technology. This is not something that a person can just view and just find those terrorism financing activities. And in particular, because we are talking about very small amounts. Unlike money laundering, when we're looking for the big money, like billions and millions of dollars, terrorism financing is nothing, is really small amounts. If we remember the Paris terror attack in the theater, it was like a couple of dozens of euros or hundreds. September 11 was $500,000, the entire operation. So you don't need a lot of money in order to do that, but you need to be able to detect that. So we mentioned expertise, we mentioned technology. There's a need to be a political will to do that and follow the money. You need to educate the financial system in order to bring up those suspicions and bring you the information in order to make sure that you're able to find that, and then also to collaborate internationally. Now, there are many sophisticated manners to do that. You can use Hawala, the underground banking, trade-based terrorism financing. This is a very popular method to do that these days, because you're faking trades activities, and in that way you are transferring funds. And what we also see is that countries who are places remotely from the area of the conflict, of the terror activities, many times tend to just really put a blind eye on that, because they don't feel, or they don't understand that their financial system, which is really in a very with a large geographical distance from the area of the terrorism activities, they just don't try to understand that many times, and therefore they are being used to transfer funds and big money. And I think that all countries need to put more measures in place. I think that one of the things that we've seen with the recent sanction, for example, was the transparency of beneficial ownership. Namely, that to make sure that it is a transparent to country to know the entire structure of entity, legal entity, for example, who is actually holding that. And many countries did not implement that into their system. And recently, the FATF make sure that they are doing that in additional measure. But I'll stop here, perhaps, because I've taken too much of the time.
No, that's fine. So, Rexon, I want to ask you, how strong is India-US cooperation on terrorism, counterterrorism capabilities, on intelligence sharing, and combating terror finance? Because we've just heard about terror finance and how it's necessary for all countries to come on the same page and not just have individual battles to fight. So is US committed now on this? And the other thing that I want to ask you is that, the aid that the Trump administration stopped to Pakistan, one thought that it's going to stay that way. Then Pakistan, the gray list, not gray list, maybe gray list that keeps happening with FATF. What happens now? Is there a rapprochement on between US and Pakistan now?
Smita, thanks. And just offer a few thoughts to your two questions. I think my answer to your first question is that there is, from every dimension that I see, exceptionally strong cooperation between the United States and India on this basket of issues related to terrorism and threats of violence against our interests, our people, India's interests, India's people. I think it stretches back years, but I think that the arc of our collaboration and our cooperation is only getting wider and deeper, as reflected by the nature of the underlying relationship. And I think that's the fundamental connection that I see, that our two countries are getting closer in almost all respects. We see that politically, geopolitically, economically, from a security standpoint. And that underlying basis is what opens up deeper and deeper cooperation in an area where you have to have trust between two governments, when you share sensitive information, when you look at how you operate, how you protect your interests and people. And I would only point to the most recent example being the statement issued by the Quad foreign ministers today. And if you look through that statement, there are two very robust paragraphs dealing with our shared commitment to combat terrorism in any respect and anywhere. And so, I think at the heart of it, for the United States, for India, and for other countries, unfortunately, around the world, we all share the searing experience of having, experienced terrorist attacks and having lost lives of our citizens. And we, as an American, I would say, we are forever changed by that and by the event of 9/11. And, we will never take our eye off of the threat of terrorism anywhere, whether we have troops there or not. The commitment by, the vision laid out by President Biden when he described our posture related to these issues as we withdrew from Afghanistan is that we will remain vigilant and we will act. But the nature of our actions, of course, have changed because our presence and posture in Afghanistan, as we all know, has changed. But there's no way to question our resolve when it comes to this set of issues. But how we act, and I think, and how we act in deeper concert with other countries will evolve and change over time.
Right. I'm going to... Sure. Absolutely.
I've been dying to ask this question because she's been with FATF. And when Pakistan was put in the FATF, and it's not just about Pakistan, but just about FATF procedures. So when Pakistan was put in FATF for about 3.5 years, they jumped through the hoops. They did all sorts of things. They lied. They dissembled. They did everything. And ultimately, after 3 years, the FATF bought it, and they said, yes, Pakistan has done fabulous work in cleaning up their anti-money laundering and counter-terror finance. I think 5 months after that, I think yesterday or today, there's a statement by the finance minister of Pakistan. Now, they are supposed to have stopped all this, right? Who says that virtually every month, or every year, something like $2 billion are transported in trucks to Afghanistan. Now, everybody knows what Afghanistan is. Now, either this is going for terror finance, or this is going for trade finance, but this is like money laundering because this is off the books. And yet, this is the finance minister of Pakistan saying this, and yet the FATF suddenly found that Pakistan has improved its AML, CFT systems. What was FATF smoking or thinking or doing?
It's a very heavy challenge to respond. I'll try to do that. I just want to first say that I'm not talking on behalf of the FATF. I was the head of the Israeli delegation to the FATF until last year, and also the co-chair of the operational working group, the RTMG. So the opinions are mine only. Now, you are pointing out correctly that the FATF indeed is monitoring countries against standards, international standards that all countries need to be in compliance with. Up until 10 years ago, the standards were purely technical. It was like a question of yes and no. Either countries had the legislation in place or didn't have it. And that was, of course, not efficient. So they added a level of efficiency in order to make sure that the country is indeed implementing that. And they are reviewing all countries. I was an assessor in one of those evaluations to make sure if a country is in compliance or not. Now, with respect to Pakistan, Pakistan was put on the gray list because of very poor results on its mutual evaluation. And it got a very long action plan in which it shows plenary after plenary that it did not comply with. When I was at the FATF, it was still did not comply with. And by the way, Pakistan was kept complaining all the time, how come that you're reviewing us so strictly? Because other countries are being taken off the gray list more easily than us, and we are being reviewed more in a scrutinizing manner. Now, I know that the FATF, when it took Pakistan out of the gray list, it did so because it demonstrated that it pursue all the action plan. And indeed, not many times the FATF does not have the tools to actually know what happens on ground. In this particular case, I know from what I've heard that they were able to demonstrate that the main problem was with respect to terrorism financing, that they were doing some actions that prove that they have the mechanism. If they want to act on those aspects, they have the ability to do that. Now, what you're saying basically is, well, they passed the mutual evaluation, they got out of the gray list, and they don't do that anymore because FATF only check if they have the capability. But I do want to actually ask you, perhaps, or other delegates, that, you know, there is a very there is a major problem at the FATF because countries many times are acting with some kind of a double standards. I'm the first one to say that yes, it is important to make sure that the FATF put more restrictions and requests from countries to comply with the deficiencies and to have a more strict action plan. And also countries must make sure that those countries are fulfilling all the action plans, because many times we see that due to political reasons, especially in terrorism financing, countries are letting off countries very easily. For example, Iran is keep asking again and again, why do you demand us to go over the entire action plan and let us go out of the gray list earlier? And again, then we see political opinion of certain countries, and you know, that's something that personally I think it's really bad.
Thank you.
And it's not necessarily India, but
okay.
no, just but I fully agree with that, and it brings us to results.
The political
that we don't really
question.
like.
Yeah. So I'll take that to Jeffrey. The political considerations. Is it because of that that what Mehbooba was saying, that, you know, the world attention has just moved away from Afghanistan? There is a fatigue we have a collapsing economy in Pakistan, a nuclear armed nation which is collapsing, falling into the abyss, Afghanistan. But whether for political reasons or just fatigue, nobody's talking about it.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, of course, there's a fatigue. And by the way, this is precisely what Putin was relying on in regard to the Ukraine. He thought that Western public opinion would get bored with assisting the Ukrainians, and that if he got it, stuck it out for long enough, there'd be such pressure from public opinion. That's not going to happen, by the way, because public opinion is pretty solid in terms of supporting the Ukraine. No, but you're absolutely right. And this is one of the dilemmas of democracy. We have to keep our people on board. We need to win their support, and maybe we need to more actively engage. By the way, I should mention that in a previous life, I spent 30 years in the British military, spending a lot of that time on counterterrorism. And I remember saying to an old soldier that I'd been to the Indian Staff College, spent a year there. He said, "Oh, Quetta," he said. I said, no. I said, it's a place called Wellington in the south of India. Quetta is in Pakistan. It's the headquarters of the Afghan Taliban. So he was rather surprised by all of that. Some Indians, by the way, many question why we seem to be sort of almost tolerant of the Pakistanis on so many of these issues. And this again comes to one of these dilemmas that we face. We've got quite a significant British population of Pakistani origin in the United Kingdom. Nothing like the size of the Muslim population in India, of course, but a lot of those people, they still have families in Pakistan. They travel backwards and forwards. We need the cooperation of the Pakistan authorities. We need to know what some of them are up to. They send their children out to madrasas. We want to know the nature of those madrasas. We need cooperation with the Pakistani authorities. So that's an explanation for part of the ambivalence. We also see, of course, the power of China on Pakistan, and that is something that we don't want to in any way encourage. So difficulties there. There are other examples. By the way, Sri Lanka. All the time of the LTTE terrorism in Sri Lanka. There was a significant population in London of Tamil origin. Most of them well integrated into British society and all the rest of it, but a significant element that was supporting the LTTE, and they were bearing on the population to provide funding for continued LTTE activity. And it was very, very difficult in a democracy like ours. On the one side, you wanted the security issues, you want to bear down on the terrorism and the extremists. On the other side, you have to recognize that you have a wider population and you don't want to antagonize them or imagine that we're somehow or other bearing down on them.
Thank you. We're running short of time, so I'm going to have concluding remarks. Mehbooba, just to come to you, this internecine war that's happening with the Taliban outfits, you were mentioning about how you work on humanitarian causes. How difficult is it for aid to reach people? Like Sushant was saying, that money is going in trucks. Money is going to come in from Europe, from America, from everywhere, aid. Is it going to reach, and how difficult is it for aid to reach the people who genuinely need it?
Thank you. This is absolutely a question that is in the minds of every Afghan and every international, community working in Afghanistan that are, giving aids to the people. Because don't forget, there is every week actually, Afghanistan, one of the banks receiving about $40 million, in cash that comes in these big, big boxes inside one of our banks, and that's for the aid money that is supposed to be given to the people. To tell you the honest truth, so far, although everybody says that that's the money that goes into the hands of the people that actually need it, there is no way to prove that that's exactly what is happening. And we keep on asking and asking and asking, everybody and trying to find a way, a system that can actually control that and give us an answer. But the answer is not given to us at all. So for that matter, and I do know, for example, because in my office, I am sitting there. I have, this shelter that I'm looking after the women. I also have some projects around in different provinces of Afghanistan through UNHCR. But at the same time, every single day, I do sit down in that office of mine, and from the cash that my friends they're gathering for me and they're sending it to me, I'm paying it to the Afghan families because they don't have really anything. They have no money. They have sick people in their families. They have no food. They have nothing. So when those women, they come to my door, or those men, and I have to give them that money. So I keep on wondering what on earth is happening with all of this money that is coming for so-called aid. Who is it going to?
Very
Because right now
tragic,
it's not
yes.
going anywhere else.
Very tragic. So I'm going to come to you, Rexon, with with this focus on Eurasia and the situation in Ukraine on one hand, and the Indo-Pacific on the other. We've heard so much of this conversation here at the Raisina Dialogue too. Has the US taken its eyes off Pakistan and Afghanistan? You said that the Biden administration is committed to fighting terrorism, is committed to restoring law and order in Afghanistan. But on the ground, as Mehbooba says, we don't see that happening. And Sushant also mentioned it. So, how important is this region for America?
No, thanks. Look, my answer is that it's not a 0-1, a zero-sum question. The nature of the U.S. posture has, of course, changed. I'd be the first one to admit that. And the approach that our government takes, I think, has more to do with working with other countries, India in particular, but others as well, when it comes to how we assess U.S. interests in this region. Now, I did say earlier that we are committed to the counterterrorism and combating terrorism. But just to be clear, I think the nature of our interests in Afghanistan have changed. I didn't use the phrase law and order and rebuilding law and order in Afghanistan, because that's not the posture of my country now. But we remain vigilant when it comes to our security and our interests, and we want to work with others to ensure that we seek to widen the web of security. The conditions on the ground in Afghanistan today, speaking personally, are tragic. I think there's no doubting that, and it's heartbreaking to hear the stories that you recount of the men and women and families that come to you seeking aid. I feel for them, but we were in Afghanistan for over 20 years, and there are a series of failings, not just what happened over the end game when we left, but it's a question of for all of us, of that arc of that longer period, and how is it that over 20 years we found ourselves where we were in August of 2021. So, our approach to the region is committed, and I think it's reflected in the U.S. India relationship. And we have interests. You asked me earlier about Pakistan. We have interests in Pakistan. It's a vexing relationship. That's how I think of it personally, for the United States. But I think the trajectory in the future for the United States in the region is really going to be defined more by the U.S.-India partnership and relationship, and how we approach the shared interests that we have, not just in this region, but more broadly.
All right. I'm going to throw the questions to the audience. And because Shlovit and Sushant, you can take the questions since I'm not giving you the concluding remarks. We don't have any time. So any questions from the audience? Okay, the mic is there.
I just want to actually give a clarification. Shomit knows it very well. Pakistan was not actually grey listed because of the mutual evaluation. It was actually nominated by 4 countries. I handled FATF for 6 years in MEA here. The mutual evaluation happened later on in 2019 by the Asia Pacific Group, and an additional action plan was given to them, which was of 7 points. And the earlier action plan was of 28 points. I just wanted to clarify
Right.
that. I don't want to comment on anything else.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, the gentleman there. Could you just give your
Yeah,
name?
I'm Jitain. I'm a technology expert. My question is to the speaker from Israel. I think we've seen a lot of countries banning the cryptocurrencies left, right, and center. And one of the most, good sounding, fancy looking cut copy paste reasons which is being given by everyone is that, look, crypto is being used for terror financing. So I'm not against crypto or I'm supporting crypto, but in my 10 years of experience, I think, or you in your experience, did you ever come across any significant amount of terror financing happening through cryptocurrencies? I'm sure there would have been like instances, but is there any report or record of any significant terror financing happening using cryptocurrencies? Thank you.
Yeah, we were going to talk about that.
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, I've just published an article at Harvard Law Journal about national security and cryptocurrencies. This is my specialty. So the answer is yes and no. Well, our cryptocurrencies have a lot of risk for terrorism financing. Yes, definitely. They are actually working against everything that we know in financial systems. Instead of they are anonymic to some extent. There are no borders, no supervision, no reporting mechanism, and it's every transaction is cross-country transaction. However, to your question, are we seeing cases? Yes, we see cases in terrorism financing, but not too many because early adopters, criminal organization and terrorist organization are now in the stages of adapting and getting start to use that. So we've seen a couple of cases, and actually my agency was actually handling quite a few cases. One of them was campaigns donation of Hamas to raise funds, in which they actually were publishing that on social media, and then we were able actually, because of the blockchain, to trace that. Second example that I can give is ISIL, in which they also did a fundraising campaign on social media and did that with a blockchain. And a third example would be ransomware. There was a mega national attack in Israel on a cyber attack on national infrastructure. We've paid the attacker with crypto at the beginning of the negotiation, where you just check to make sure that the hackers that you're negotiating with actually have the ability to unlock the files. So the part that was hacked paid a little bit in crypto. They gave him the files. We followed the trail of the crypto, and what we found out was that after many hundreds of transactions, it was actually cashed out to fiat money in a money exchange platform in Iran. So within the Israeli context, we immediately understood that that was not a regular criminal activity, but a terror activity, or with national motive. Now, if you ask me if that's too risky and that this activity should be outlawed or avoided, no, there are great opportunities in blockchain technology and in crypto. We just need to implement mitigating measures in order to combat that. And fortunately, there are many mitigating measures that can be and are being in place. The FATF established international regime on that, which is actually a very good case study on how the international community can get together and impose a regime. Basically, it means like previous money laundering regime with some modification, and it actually helps us, together with blockchain analytics and the AML CFT regime, we can find many times the bad actors and the terrorist activists. And just to perhaps to mention that it is important that all countries are participating in that. And India did put in place this regulation. Israel did that, the US, Canada, and many other countries, about 100 countries already. And it's easier for us to know when someone is working with a licensed platform or unlicensed. If someone is going through a licensed platform, it means that this is a green light. You can actually follow the money, and most likely it could be okay, and if not, we could trace back. If someone is choosing to use an unlicensed platform, then it is also a signaling mechanism that they have something to hide, and then law enforcement authorities can also handle that in a different manner. And it lasts for generations, so it doesn't matter when the money are going later on. When they want to cash it out or cash it in again, they have problems. But that's in short.
I have time for one more question. Yes. The gentleman here. Please give your name and the organization you represent.
My name is
Yes,
my name
yes.
is Samir. I come from Kashmir. So my question is directly to the Sushant. Now that Pakistan is off the grey list, what do you think India has? India's options are, because one thing is clear that international community has failed India repeatedly vis-a-vis Pakistan and terrorism in certain parts of Kashmir. So what should be India's strategy to counter this development?
Sushant, before you answer this, another question which I had somewhat related is that, the bombing that happened in Peshawar, the mosque bombing, Pakistan blamed Afghanistan directly. Do you think that there, in Kabul and Islamabad, there is like this general understanding that, okay, the enemy is the same now?
Which enemy is the same?
The ones who are doing the terrorism, the terror groups are the same.
But how is the understanding between Kabul and...
Will they both crack down together? That's what
on
I'm trying to
TTP?
say. On the TTP?
Are you kidding?
No.
See, the TTP is born from the same womb as the Taliban. There is no difference.
Okay.
The entire TTP leadership has been part and parcel of the Taliban movement. So I could go in tracing out the history, but you don't have much time.
Sure.
So it's one and the same. The interesting thing, and I think if you take, what's the German word? Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
So I do have it vis-a-vis
No,
Pakistan.
but this is...
No, one second.
If you're going to
So
go into
what,
that...
No, one second.
That here, it's
No,
a
no, no, I'm
country
not-
which is going into
No,
abyss,
no,
so let's rejoice.
no, one second.
No.
You can't anticipate what I'm going to say. I'm just going to say something, which is that everything which the Pakistanis told the Americans when the Americans were insisting on them to crack down on the Taliban, right? All that cock and bull story which was given to the Americans by the Pakistanis is now being given to the Pakistanis by the Taliban about the TTP. And it's poetic justice, really, right? And the Pakistanis know that this is the game that the Taliban are playing with them, but now they are caught between a rock and a hard place. They can't attack the Taliban. They want to, but they can't do it because then they get enmeshed in this whole thing. And if they try and stop it within their own borders, it's unstoppable because, like I said, it's a millenarian movement. They'll keep getting people. So it's a mess. On the question which Samir
Kashmir.
asked me.
Yeah. Kashmir,
Kashmir.
why are we
No.
waiting for the war?
No, I don't think it is about Kashmir really. It's more about Pakistan and how India will handle Pakistan. I think, the greatest ally we have in Pakistan is Pakistan itself. The way they have messed up their own country, I think is the strongest, factor in our favor. And I really think that the more Pakistan becomes weak, the more it becomes unstable. And frankly, we shouldn't buy this narrative which a lot of people give, that nuclear weapon country going to collapse. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to go bankrupt, which is very good, which means that they don't have money to give for terrorism anymore, which means that potential for causing nuisance around the world is very limited. I think that's a damn good thing to happen. And I can argue about it when we can talk about it some other time. But so I think that is one. Secondly, I think our own capabilities are increasing. And our own reaction to what the Pakistanis have been doing, I think there's a paradigm shift in that. And that seems to have knocked some sense into their head that, you can do something at a small level, but if you try and interfere too much into India, there will be hell to pay. And with an empty treasury, you can't even fight a war. So I think a lot of things are moving in our direction. So I'm a little hopeful of how
Empty
things
treasury, I wonder how long it'll be empty treasury, because somebody or the other bails out, and we have an American on the panel. So Rexon, you can't
what
escape
the
from
Americans have done
I am
right
going to
now,
let him
I
answer.
wish they had done it earlier.
So we want to know this from the American on the panel, that will you guys bail out Pakistan all over again? You can't escape this. As the only American in the panel, we are going to ask you. You can't just say it's complicated, like Facebook relationship status. You have to tell us: is America going to bail out Pakistan again?
I have no idea. In the 12 seconds that are remaining. Here.
You still have
The honest truth is I don't know. what the United States is going to do. I will say, from an American perspective, I am not nearly as dismissive as you are with respect to the integrity of security around the strategic weapons in Pakistan. That seen from the United States, that is a central question that concerns us, and I would submit it should concern most countries around the world, given the nature of their strategic stockpile. So again, I come back to my basic comment earlier. This is a vexing relationship for the United States, and it doesn't get any easier.
Yes. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this very interesting session. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.